the realm of forest and snow, they said Russia could never be tamed.
Well, they were right. Napoleon was convinced that he would have been able to destroy the Russians, and Vitebsk problem was the Russians had received numerous intelligence reports of the French whereabouts. The land parties were sent out, and minor engagements were fought on the 23rd and 26th of July at Mogilov and Ostranova. Napoleon's main army was in a prime position to attack Barclay at Vitebsk, but he decided to wait a day, and the Russians slipped out into the night and set everything on fire. Napoleon threw a bitch fit. The Russian armies at Barclay and Bagration united at Smolensk, and although he lost his chance to divide and conquer and lost half of his troops, he decided to plow on like the wonderful crazy bastard that he is. So by the 3rd of August, the French line was stretched out pretty badly. Units were scattered over useless territory from the northernmost city of Polotsk to the southernmost city of Siraj. Because of this scare, Napoleon decided to concentrate his forces and attempt to engage the Russian army in what was known as the Maneuver of Smolensk. Davout and Napoleon would command individual flanking groups and cross the Dnieper River at the western bend at Orsha. The army would then advance along the southern bank, cut the route to Moscow, and destroy the Russian army. But I think we all know the results of that. By the 4th of August, the Russians at Smolensk were fighting among themselves. Barclay de Tolly was still a fan of retreating, but the Tsar and Bagration were concerned from the land already taken by the French as a result of Bagration's scorched earth policy. After everybody made fun of Barclay's ancestry and tactics, Barclay was told to attack Napoleon at the village of Rudnia on the 7th, but they stopped when they saw the screen of Murat's cavalry and held their position. By the 13th, pontoons across the river were built and the French started their advance towards Smolensk, using Murat as a screen for their movements.
Are we going sneaky-beaky like?
The advance guard and Agrushi reached the town of Krasny, but the French couldn't inflict many casualties, most of the Russians retreating. This also triggered de Tolly's retreat from Rudnia to the north of Smolensk. The Battle of Smolensk was the first large battle of the campaign and was fought between the 16th and the 18th of August, but unfortunately, nothing really much happened. Although there was 150,000 Russians and 130,000 French, only 100,000 men total actually engaged. The French did manage to capture a couple of suburbs, but their cannons set the city on fire and triggered the retreat, where Bagration and de Tolly then decided to repeat the tactic at Vitebsk and blow up all the ammunition and get the hell out of there. But the thing is, Napoleon could have won this battle. He could have destroyed the entire Russian army. He went into tunnel vision and failed to recognize that de Tolly was still north of the city. If he had left a frontal screening force, and he could have gone around the flanks and destroyed them. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. The capture of Smolensk gave the Russian army an extra issue to deal with. De Tolly's constant retreat was wearing weary on the aristocrats and the Tsar himself, eventually culminating in the dismissal of Barclay. He was still technically in command, but now General Kutuzov was calling the shots. It was demanded by the Tsar that a fortified position was to be formed somewhere along the highway to Moscow. Kutuzov chose the village of Borodino. Napoleon had two options at this point. Yes, we all know what he did, but context is important. The first choice was to wait in Smolensk and overwinter there, allowing him to rebuild the Kingdom of Poland and his own army. But this would also leave a massive gap between him and the supply bases open for exploitation by the Russians. Stopping for too long could also be interpreted as a defeat by the European powers. I mean, if I knew Napoleon was stuck in Russia, I know I would have a crack at Paris. The second choice was to charge on with an army that was exhausted, demoralized, and hitting a big fat zero on supplies. He chose the latter. 150,000 men left Smolensk on the 25th of August, marching east in 3 columns. The march was not very fun. One of the best sources for the campaign was a journal by an infantryman by the name of Jacob Walter. The march up to there, as far as it was a march, was indescribable and inconceivable for people who have not seen anything of it. The very great heat, the dust which is like a thick fog, the closed line of marching columns, and the putrid water from holes filled with dead people and cattle brought everyone close to death, and eye pains, fatigue, thirst, and hunger tormented everybody. This man was lucky enough to survive and make his way back to Württemberg. He later wrote a book of his experiences titled As Denkwürdige Geschichtsschreibung. I can't even do this. Memorable history of the military service experienced by the author of these letters. Damn. Now I won't get into too much detail about the battles of Borodino, otherwise it will take forever. I have made a 20-second condensed version and a long version. So, let's start with the short version in 3, 2, 1.
Drop it!
That's how you do the meme, yeah? Okay, now for the longer version. Right before the main battle, the French advance guard under Davout and the Polish division under Poniatowski engaged a pack of Russians at Borodino on the 5th of September. The French took the fortified position in by means of a B-rush consisting of 3 groups, quickly swarming the position. About 4,000 French died there. Interestingly enough, the Russians used the very same guard division under Krasny, and they suffered a further 6,000 casualties from the engagement, so it kinda sucks to be them. The Battle of Borodino occurred on the 7th at 6 AM. Napoleon's famous proclamation was given to every soldier, and I'm going to read it in the original French because I can. Soldats, voilà la bataille que vous avez tant désirée. Désormais la victoire dépend de vous, elle nous est nécessaire. Elle nous donnera l'abondance de bons quartiers d'hiver et un prompt retour dans sa patrie. Conduisez-vous comme à Austerlitz, à Wieland, à Vitebsk, à Smolensk, et que la postérité la plus régulière cite avec orgueil votre conduite dans ces journées. Quel long distez-vous y était à cette grande bataille sur les murs de Moscou? Borodino was a bloodbath. It's estimated that for every second that 3 French cannons fired, about 60,000 shots in total. It was even reported by the chief surgeon for the French forces that he had performed over 200 amputations from cannon injuries alone. There were 3 major defensive points on the battlefield: Bagration's flèches, the Raevsky redoubt, and the village Rutitsa. The strategy? Throw everything at it and see what sticks. A disturbingly Russian strategy for Napoleon. He was said to be quite listless that day and was just wandering around at the back lines. He didn't even visit the major conflict points as he normally did, which could have been a major attribution to his loss. I personally think that he knew he had lost the entire campaign at that point. Another option was proposed by Davout was that they should exploit the fracture on the left, split the army and march around to smash the flank, but Napoleon didn't listen to him. He's criticized for this by historians, but to his credit, Davout's suggestion was very risky and could have possibly led to a repeat of the Russian army's retreat at Vitebsk and Smolensk. Let's break down the battle into 3 parts. First, the northern side. Now this was the village itself and Raevsky's redoubt. Eugene de Beauharnais was told to assault the position in the first French charge. Borodino was captured very easily as the defending Russians attempted to retreat, but the messenger got there too late. The redoubt wasn't so easy to take. It was a very slow grind for both armies. At the start of the battle, the redoubt was successfully held by the Russians against 3 separate attacks. One of Eugene's attacks was even delayed by a Cossack raid on the northern flank, resulting in the pulling of his entire corps for an overreaction to a mere 5,000-man threat, where the only Cossack goal was just to harass infantry. They weren't that much of a threat, and this pushed Eugene back by 2 hours. Eventually, Napoleon ordered a giant attack with 3 infantry divisions, 2 cavalry corps, and 400 cannons at about 2 PM. The cavalry attacked south of the redoubt, creating a gap, and then attacked the open east, while the infantry pushed forward and attacked it frontally. The redoubt was captured at about 3:30 PM thanks to the 7th Cuirassier Division. Napoleon was hoping to quickly smash through the defences in the centre of the Fleche. He would then push through with one of his corps and destroy the divided armies. Unfortunately, the centre of the battle was a big fat giant mess. It was very close quarters and a lot of the killing occurred here in hand-to-hand combat. Now, the major problem at this point was Napoleon's refusal to commit his guard. His forces were doing okay, but Napoleon spent the entire battle relaxing at Borodino and just relied on battle reports from his commanders.
I'm not yet ready to throw in my reserves. Go and take another look at the battle and report again.
He reportedly had a nasty cough that just needed his undivided attention. 7 large-scale attacks were made on the Russian fortifications, each one being rebuffed. Before or during the final attack at 11 AM, it's not really confirmed as to when, General Bagration suffered a wound from a cannonball, multiple splinters entering his leg. The injury was severe enough to warrant his evacuation from the battlefield. The thing was, Bagration was very close to the combat, giving his men a much-needed morale boost, but when the 8th and final French attack came in, he was hit. By then, the command structure had fallen. The attack lasted for nearly an hour and the Russians were pushed off the Fleche. The centre had mostly been taken, but the French soldiers were too exhausted to continue their push and just exchanged pot shots for the rest of the battle. General Bagration later died from his wound by infection. The southern village of Rutitsa, the left flank, was weakly held by General Tuchkov, poorly armed militia, and light skirmishing troops hidden in the forest. Polish troops under Poniatowski took the village by about 11 AM, but were pushed back out after General Bagovat sent his own corps as reinforcements. Tuchkov died in this engagement, and he was replaced by Bagovat to command the left flank. At 2 p.m, Juno, who was sent to clear the Jaegers from the woods earlier in the battle, eventually managed to make contact with the Polish, and they spent 3 hours trying to get themselves together to make a coordinated attack on the village, which began at about 5 p.m. When Utitsa was finally captured by the French, this was the last part of the defense line to fall, and this forced Bagovet to commit to a retreat for the rest of his forces, thus ending the Battle of Borodino. At 6 p.m, the battle ended in a stalemate that leaned towards the French, and all 3 of the Russian defensive fixtures had been successfully taken. But as night came, the French retreated from their advanced positions to avoid being cut off, and both armies set up camp overnight on the battlefield. Kutuzov debated going to the battle again, but by morning when he realized that a third of his army was gone, he packed up and started retreating. Now, if Napoleon had committed his guard to the center, he would have most likely been able to cause enough casualties to force a surrender, but the rest of the army was way too tired and his hesitancy got the better of him, leading to 30,000 of his own men dead. All of this is why Napoleon was doomed to fail. His position in Europe was becoming untenable, and as he got older his confidence started to wane, this concept being prominent at Vitebsk, Smolensk and the Flesh in Borodino. But he still had his precious guard, the road to Moscow was finally open, and Napoleon was convinced that by taking the city, he could force the Tsar to surrender. But we are going to leave that whole mess and the subsequent winter meme for the next video.